Well, welcome everyone. I think we'll get started. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Jillian McConnell. I am a knowledge broker with Brain Exchange, and on behalf of my colleagues from the Kidney Foundation of Canada, Sarah Cruikshank and Lydia Lauder, we welcome you and are so pleased that you're able to take part in this event tonight. Before we begin, I want to take a few moments to review the technology that we will be using this evening. The audio is provided over the phone, which means if you're hearing my voice, then you're all set. And the visuals or the slides are provided by the online link that you should have received in the connection details. So that way you can watch the slides as our presenters speak. On the bottom left of your screen, you will see a blue bubble or a blue circle. If you move your cursor or your mouse over to it, you will see Chat with the Presenter. Click on that, and that is the chat pod. And that is how you can communicate with me during the event as well as with the presenters. Please be aware that only the presenters and I can see your comments or questions in the chat pod, not your fellow participants. And this is also where you can send your questions during the Q&A portion of tonight's event. I do want to let you know that all of the participants' lines are muted for this call, and that just helps us minimize any background noise or any private conversations that you may be having on the side regarding the talk. If you do need to ask a question or have a concern during the actual presentation, then please use the chat pod as we won't be able to hear you. The presentation itself is being recorded, and within a week or so it will be available on the Kidney Foundation of Canada's website, and you will also receive notice when the recording is available via email. So for the purpose of today, those are the only features you need to be familiar with. The webinar is scheduled to be 90 minutes long, give or take, and our presenters will speak for about 60 minutes or so, and then we'll have 30 minutes at the end for some Q&A and discussion. That may be a bit longer, a bit shorter, depending on how the night goes forward. I do ask that people refrain from asking questions until the end of the discussion, unless, of course, the question is with respect to a definition or an acronym, which, of course, will impact your understanding of the content as we move forward. Okay, so now that the technical aspects have been taken care of, it's my pleasure to introduce our webinar topic and our presenters for this evening. Tonight we will be talking about healthy lifestyle and kidney disease, and we are so pleased to have three wonderful speakers with us. June Martin is a registered dietitian who has been working with PD, hemodialysis, and CKD, so chronic kidney disease patients, for over 15 years at Grand River Hospital in Kitchener, Ontario. She is the past chair of the Canadian Association of Nephrology Dietitians and an integral part of the team behind the Kidney Community Kitchen, a Kidney Foundation website providing recipes and renal diet information for people with chronic kidney disease. Dr. Clara Bohm is a nephrologist with the Manitoba Renal Program and an assistant professor and clinical researcher at the University of Manitoba. She received her MD from McMaster University and completed her internal medicine residency at the University of Saskatchewan and nephrology training at Dalhousie University. She also received a master's in public health from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health in 2014. Since 2005, as the medical lead of the Manitoba Renal Program Exercise and Wellness Program, she has developed a variety of clinical exercise initiatives for individuals with all stages of CKD. Her research interest lies in the effects of exercise on physical function, symptoms, and the quality of life in individuals with chronic kidney disease. And finally, Sandra Muncaster was only 18 when she was diagnosed with renal failure. Being near death, she was immediately admitted to the Sioux Area Hospital for dialysis. She spent only 9 months on hemodialysis before she received a kidney transplant in Toronto. Unfortunately, the upper pole of the kidney never worked, so it failed after only 2 years, and she has been on hemodialysis ever since. When she's not at the hospital, she enjoys spending time with her hubby of 20 years and her 3 rescue cats. She is also has a thriving career as a freelance writer. So on behalf of our participants, we welcome you, and we will welcome you, June, Dr. Bohm, and Sandra. And June, I believe we are starting with you, so the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jillian. So tonight I am going to speak about healthy eating and your kidneys because what you eat is an important part of a healthy lifestyle. So when you talk about healthy eating, it's really important that you ask, what is a healthy diet for me? Because your special needs with your own medical conditions may make your diet different than it would be for your neighbor or your friend or even another person with kidney disease. So all renal dietitians like to say that there is no standard kidney diet, and that's absolutely true. But tonight I'm going to talk about the things that we generally look at. So if we're talking about preventing the progression or keeping your kidneys healthy, the three things that we would look at would be protein, salt or sodium, and phosphate additives. As kidney disease advances, we may have to look more in depth at phosphorus and potassium, but I will touch on those, but I'm going to focus on the first three things tonight. So when it comes to protein, we all need protein every day to keep our muscles strong, repair any tissues, fight off infections, and heal wounds. But sometimes we don't even know where the protein comes from in our diets. And generally it comes from things like beans, legumes, eggs, fish. And we know that you need to get enough of those foods, but excess proteins, your kidneys have to filter out the waste from protein after you eat it. If you eat more than your body needs, then it adds an additional workload for your kidneys. There's some evidence out now suggesting that plant-based proteins may be beneficial. So if you currently don't eat a lot of plant-based protein, it might be something that you want to consider adding to your diet. And balancing your protein intake can help prolong the life of your kidneys and help you stay healthy. So we recommend that you choose modest portions. And so in general, you want to choose portions of meat about the size of the palm of your hand and the thickness of your baby finger, or around the size of a deck of cards. And these recommendations are very similar for anybody following a cardiac diet, a diabetic diet, or even a cancer prevention diet, just modest portions. The next nutrient we'll talk about tonight is salt or sodium. And it's important that you pay attention to your salt intake because excess sodium can lead to increased blood pressure, swelling, and increased workload for your kidneys and your heart. And unfortunately in North America, we tend to eat a lot of salt. And it's not just the salt that we add to the food, because most people, even if they don't add salt, may be getting a lot of salt in their diet. So the other places we get salt, along with sea salt and seasoning salts, are things like food additives. So things that are added to your food, like monosodium glutamate or sodium phosphate, are added for reasons other than flavoring. And then any sort of processed and takeout foods, restaurant foods, processed meats, processed cheeses, all of these foods are much saltier than their unprocessed alternatives. So you might be wondering, how much sodium do I need? And you can see on this slide that as you age, you need less salt. And that's because the kidneys are less able to filter salt as we get older. And that means extra salt has more effect on blood pressure as you age. The upper limit for sodium across the ages is around 2,300 milligrams, but in Canada, we generally get over 3,500 milligrams per day. So what is 2,300 milligrams? Well, that is equal to about a level teaspoon of table salt. So it's not actually that much. And here you can see when we look at where we are getting our sodium, this is from looking at Canadian sodium consumption, only about 12% of the salt in our diet comes from the salt we actually add. 11% comes naturally, and the rest is from processed and takeout foods. So simply getting rid of the salt shaker is not enough. We need to also decrease our intake of these hidden sources of sodium. And how do you do that? Well, it's funny because most of us, we tend to adapt our taste buds to how much salt we're eating. So sometimes it's important that you gradually reduce your sodium intake. And I think I went forward here, sorry. So gradually decreasing the amount of salt you use in cooking and at the table, and this includes sea salt, which has the same effects on your blood pressure as table salt. Flavor foods with lemon juice, fresh garlic, spices, herbs, and as much as you can, try to avoid instant and prepackaged foods because those can add a huge amount of sodium to your diet. Choosing fresh or frozen vegetables instead of canned is a great option. And if you do choose canned, buy the ones that are no salt added. And use natural cheeses instead of processed cheeses. You can also find unsalted or lightly salted snack foods such as pretzels, nuts, popcorn, and crackers instead of their salty alternatives. And in Canada, sodium is always on food labels. So you can compare sodium content between similar foods and choose the lowest sodium option. So we always recommend that you check your nutrition facts table. So when you're looking at a nutrition facts table, there's a couple things that's really important to look at. Number one, you want to look at the serving size because some of those have just ridiculous serving sizes. So you want to look at that serving size. This is for a cup of soup, 350, 3/4 a cup. Would you eat that much soup? Probably not. You'd probably eat twice that much. Or I always think it's funny when I see a chocolate bar and the serving is half of a chocolate bar. So you want to also look here at the milligrams of sodium. And you can see it will either be as the number of milligrams or the percentage. And the percent is probably the easiest one to look at. And I apologize, these red circles aren't lined up quite with where they should be. So look at the green arrows. When you're looking at the percent daily value, you want to think to yourself, lower is better. And you want to choose ideally something with 10% or less daily value. And ultimately, your bottom line is just to choose fresh and unprocessed food more often. And keep in mind that small changes really do add up. And lowering your sodium is definitely good for your kidney health. The next nutrient I'm going to talk about is phosphorus, and unless you've been in the kidney world for a while, you probably aren't too familiar with it. And phosphorus is a mineral, very similar, found in a lot of the same foods that you'd find calcium. And normally a healthy kidney cleans extra phosphorus out of their blood. But when the kidneys are sick, the phosphorus can build up, and too much phosphorus in your diet can increase the workload of your kidneys. So most people with early chronic kidney disease don't need to worry about the phosphorus that's naturally in their food, but they should avoid foods with phosphorus or phosphate additives to protect your kidneys. So there's two kinds of phosphorus in the diet. There's naturally occurring phosphorus, and then there's phosphate additives. And one of the key differences is how your body absorbs those two. So naturally occurring phosphorus is absorbed about 40 to 60%, whereas phosphate additives are generally 100% absorbed. And they act a bit differently in the body. So these additives are added to a huge number of foods in our food supply these days: beverages, fresh and frozen meats, fast foods, processed cheese products. And you can see this list of fun names here. You'll see sodium phosphate, calcium phosphate. You might see different kinds of pyrophosphates, sodium hexametaphosphate, and phosphoric acid. And you really want to watch out for these foods. And I'm going to show you an example here of a product. I'll let you guess what that is. And if you look at this product, the nutrition facts table certainly has nothing in there about phosphorus, although I will point out this is a very high sodium option. And there's nothing but phosphorus on the nutrition facts table, so you need to take a look closer at the ingredients list. And you'll see a few phosphate additives that are highlighted here: sodium tripolyphosphate, sodium phosphate, and calcium phosphate. And these are quite significant because Health Canada allows up to 3.5% by weight to be added to processed cheeses. So products like this can give you a lot of phosphate into the diet. And here I've got another example. This is from a grocery store right across the street from where I work. And so my colleague and I went and took some pictures. And you can see the product on the list. On the left, it has this word seasoned. Very small letters. It's technically in the name of the product. And if you go on to read, you'll see that it has an ingredients list. And the ingredients list includes chicken, water, salt, and sodium phosphates. And it's interesting because when they put an S on the end of the sodium phosphates, they can add up to 6 different phosphates without having to list them individually. So this word seasoned is a clue that something has been added to your meat. And in addition to adding phosphate, it adds quite a bit of sodium that typically wouldn't be in your meat. So the product on the right has no ingredients list, no nutrition facts tables, and no additives, and that would be a better option for you. So you might be asking yourself, should I avoid phosphate additives? And probably everyone should. Most of us get more than enough phosphorus naturally in our diet. And if you do have any issues with your kidneys, then this isn't a good option for you. And again, I'll just reinforce, you want to choose fresh and unprocessed foods more often. There's also a couple of healthy eating patterns options out there for you. So the one example I have here is the DASH diet, or the DASH eating plan. Another great one that you might have heard about is a Mediterranean diet. And these are awesome options for people who don't require a potassium restriction. They really focus on lots of fresh fruits and vegetables. The DASH diet focuses on low-fat dairy products, whole grains, high fiber. It limits sweets, sugar, and alcohol. And it really encourages fish, poultry, legumes, nuts, and seeds, and less red meat. But if you do require a potassium restriction, then you have to be cautious with a diet like this. So when we talk about potassium, not all kidney patients need to limit their potassium. We don't want to see it too low or too high. It's bad for your heart. And your need for a potassium restriction can depend on the medications or if you're on dialysis, which kind of dialysis therapy you choose. And potassium is ubiquitous in our food supply. You see it in fruits, vegetables, dairy, nuts, seeds, legumes, salt substitutes. And now new potassium additives such as potassium lactate. It's not on this slide, but the newest one is called potassium acetate. And then potassium chloride, which is a salt substitute as well. So if you do need a potassium restriction, then I do recommend that you meet with a dietitian to get more information on that. So when we talk about healthy eating for your kidneys, for most of us, it includes cutting back on salt, getting the right amount of protein for you, not too much, but certainly you want to get enough. That's where your palm-sized portions come in. Phosphorus, most of us should avoid phosphate additives. And when it comes to potassium, you don't need to restrict unless you've been told you have a high potassium, or your doctor or your dietitian have advised you of that. So if you're not sure, ask for a referral to see a registered dietitian who can help figure out the diet that's healthy for you. There's a couple of recipe websites that I've listed here, the kidneycommunitykitchen.ca, which is an awesome website with lots of great recipes from kidney patients, and myspiceitup.ca, which is a little bit more focused for dialysis patients. Oh, and that is my section. Sorry.
Thank you very much, June. So we'll hold questions until the end, just to make sure that everyone has lots of time to present their slides. And so we'll move forward here. So Dr. Bohm, you're on deck next.
Thanks for inviting me this evening.
Welcome.
So I just want to point out and remind people who may live in the east or west where Winnipeg actually is. It's in the middle of the country. It is actually 2 hours from the U.S. border, which has been cut off here, and that's where, and we live in Winnipeg, most of the nephrologists, but we actually cover the whole province of Manitoba with the Manitoba Renal Program. And I don't have time to speak about all our exercise programs, but in the questions, if anyone's interested, we do have exercise counseling as well as an intradialytic cycling program and also education and exercise class sessions. So happy to answer any questions after. So tonight I'm going to briefly cover some definitions so we're all on the same page. I'm going to talk about the risks of low physical activity in people with chronic kidney disease, what the benefits of physical activity and exercise are in chronic kidney disease. And then by then I hope I will have convinced you that it's a good idea to get more active. And so then what types of activities perhaps people with kidney disease should do, how to get started, when to do exercise, and maybe when not to or when to hold off. So first, some definitions. Physical activity is defined as a bodily movement caused by voluntary muscle contraction that increases the amount of energy the body uses. So my kids canoeing here are doing physical activity. Physical fitness is a set of criteria that relate to the ability to perform physical activity, and this would include something like how quickly somebody can walk a certain distance or how much weight you can lift with a biceps curl. Exercise is a planned, structured, and repetitive body movement done to maintain or improve physical fitness. So my kids in the canoe here, if they decided they wanted to increase their arm strength by canoeing and planned regular 30-minute sessions every day at a certain time, they would be doing exercise and physical activity while they're canoeing. There are different types of exercise. They include aerobic exercise, or what's sometimes called cardiovascular, and that is any activity that uses large muscle groups, can be maintained continuously, and is rhythmic in nature. And it's really related to our endurance ability. Resistance exercise is repetitive activity that incorporates weights or to increase muscle strength. And again, it doesn't have to be traditional weights. It can be a TheraBand or resistance band or even using your own body weight to increase your muscle strength. And then flexibility and balance are various types of exercises, including stretching, standing on one leg, balance exercises. And these are really important for falls prevention and activities of daily living. Physical function is defined as an individual's ability to perform activities in their daily lives, and it also is referred to as functional status sometimes as well. So, how do these all relate to chronic kidney disease? Well, low levels of physical function are known to be present in many people with chronic kidney disease. And this happens in all stages of chronic kidney disease, but it worsens as kidney disease progresses. In fact, levels of physical function are 50% of predicted values in individuals who are on dialysis. And this is compared to age and sex-matched controls in the general population. Not surprisingly, low physical activity levels are associated with low physical function in CKD, and these two things are actually associated with lots of problems and adverse events, and particularly a 1.5 to 2-fold increased risk of hospitalization and death. So this picture from Kirsten Johansson that was published many years ago in one of the kidney journals actually shows how exercise can impact this cycle that I was talking about on the previous page. And so what you see is that kidney disease and other chronic diseases contribute to sedentary behavior, decreased fitness and function, disability, and it's a cycle that continues on and on. And you can also see that exercise actually impacts almost every step in this cycle and has really great potential to improve the lives of people with kidney disease. So the good news is that this is true, actually, that a lot of rigorous studies have shown that exercise programming can improve physical function. And it actually is also shown that individuals at all levels of physical function and all stages of kidney disease can benefit from exercise programming. So it's not just the people who are young and fit and healthy who benefit from this, it's also the elderly and people who actually have very poor functional status who can benefit from exercise programming. From the studies, it seems that a combination of both aerobic and resistance exercise is best, but there isn't that much research on flexibility and balance exercise, so I don't think we really know how that contributes to improving function and improving the lives of people with kidney disease yet. The other good news is that when surveyed, people who have kidney disease say that if they were advised by their physician to exercise, they would. And also in Canada, exercise programs for people with kidney disease are becoming increasingly available. A recent survey we did said 60% of renal programs in Canada actually had some sort of exercise programming or options available for people with kidney disease. The other good news is that there are a lot of exercise programs for individuals with other chronic diseases that may be appropriate for people with kidney disease as well. So what are the benefits of physical activity and exercise in kidney disease? Well, we've talked about improved strength and physical function, improved physical fitness. It also improves quality of life in many of the studies that have been done. Improved blood pressure control, improved dialysis clearance, and phosphate clearance have also been shown. There is pretty good evidence that exercise improves symptoms associated with chronic kidney disease, improves mood and sleep. And we think from some of the data, although it's not rigorous yet, that exercise in the long term will improve or will decrease disability, result in more independent living and longer independent living, and result in less hospitalization and perhaps even longer survival for people with kidney disease. But that is not definitive in the research that we have yet. There are some barriers to exercising and exercise programs. When surveyed, less than 50% of nephrologists indicated that they ask and counsel people with kidney disease about activity. And these surveys also demonstrated that some nephrologists really are not comfortable counseling individuals with kidney disease about exercise. And this is because it's not really part of our training as nephrologists. People with kidney disease complain of fatigue, which may limit their participation in an exercise program, as well as shortness of breath, and same thing with that. There's also lack of time because of need to go to lots of medical appointments or dialysis appointments. And people with kidney disease identify, as with the general population, that motivation is a problem in terms of getting active. As well, getting to programs, exercise programs and community centers, transportation is a problem. And there are some programming limitations. The medical or the health environment in Canada currently is very financially strapped. There are limitations to providing specific programs for chronic kidney disease. And at the same time, this is competing with the fact that kidney patients are telling us that really they need guidance and help to get started being active, that they don't feel comfortable doing it on their own. And then the other problem is that although chronic disease programs with other chronic diseases are available for people with kidney disease to participate in, sometimes we've found that people get inappropriate advice regarding diet and fluid intake, which is very specific to individuals with kidney disease, and the leaders of these other exercise programs may not be aware. So although there are some barriers, hopefully I've convinced you by now that actually getting active and remaining active is a good thing to do. So how do you get started? Well, although almost everyone can perform some type of physical activity, it is really important to check with your physician before you start, partly to determine safety to exercise, but also to determine any specific contraindications related to your kidney disease or your stage of kidney disease. You can ask your renal program, your physician, the nurses in the clinic or in the dialysis if there are specific classes or programs for individuals with kidney disease in your community. If not, these are the things I suggest. So start with an activity that you like to do or want to try. Don't just go to the gym because you think that's what everybody who exercises should do. You will stick to something that you like to do much more than just doing what you think you're supposed to do. Consider inviting a friend or a family member to join you. That makes it more fun, but also makes you more responsible and have to answer to somebody. Pick a convenient place and a convenient time. There's no way you're ever going to show up if it's at a terrible time or very far away. And commit to it. Put it in your calendar and make it an important appointment that you want to attend. When you start gradually or start low and go slow. If you've never exercised before, it's been a long time since you've been active, it's not going to be easy, and you need to start very light and for short periods of time before you can move up. And finally, make achievable goals for yourself, and that will help you progress. This may not be time or activity goals. It may be, I want to be able to play with my grandchildren, or I want to be able to walk far enough to go on a certain trip. And those will also help motivate you and keep maintaining your exercise program. This is a pretty busy slide. These are the recommendations for people with chronic kidney disease from the American College of Sports Medicine. And basically what they show is they show the types of physical activity, exercise, and how often you should do them, the intensity you should do them to, the time, starting, for example, with aerobic exercise, 3 to 5 minute bouts with goals of 20 to 30 minutes per session or per day, and then the type of activity or suggestions that you might want to do. I'll just point out that aerobic exercise, they're suggesting 3 to 5 days per week, resistance 2 to 3 days per week, as with flexibility 2 to 3 days per week. The Borg RPE I will show you on the next slide. Basically, it's a self-reported measure of intensity. And then for resistance, in terms of how much to lift with a weight, if you do one biceps curl, for example, you would do 3/4 of that weight that you can only do one biceps curl with. And the goal for resistance exercise is one set of 10 to 15 repetitions per muscle. Sometimes we find that people with kidney disease need to use lower percent of the rep max, so 50% or so. This is the Borg rating of perceived exertion. It's for aerobic, to guide you with aerobic intensity. And so your target, as you can see here, it didn't come out exactly either. It's 11 to 13 actually right here. And that target is between fairly light and somewhat hard. And so what's that? I'm going to try and highlight it here. I'm not doing very well though. So 11 to 13, fairly light and somewhat hard. And what that means is that you should be mildly short of breath working, but still able to complete a full sentence without breaks. So once you've started exercising, there are some times when you should stop exercising, or perhaps some weeks when you shouldn't exercise. So when to stop exercising for a little while, if you've been recently admitted to hospital and ill, wait at least a week before you return to your regular activity. If you have a fever, if you have extremely high or low blood pressure, don't exercise. If in general your physical or medical condition just has changed, maybe wait a little while and reassess, or decrease the amount of exercise or length of time you're exercising. If your joint or bone problems are worsening with exercise, then you need to see your physician and reassess what you're doing. If you're diabetic and you're getting frequent low blood sugars, it is important to again reassess with your physician and not exercise until your diabetic medications are reassessed and your sugars are more stable. If you've had a change in medications, particularly diuretics, water pills, blood pressure medications, or heart medications, wait approximately 1 week before you increase any exercise or do any really intense exercise to make sure your body's accommodated the new medication change. Do not exercise in hot and humid weather. And in people in the later stages of kidney disease particularly, If you've developed fluid overload and gained more than 5 kilograms of weight, this can stress your heart, and so you should not exercise until your fluid status has normalized. When to stop exercising, so if you're at an exercise session and you develop any of these symptoms, you should stop, rest, and get help, either medical help or help from somebody who's around right away if it hasn't gone away after a few minutes. I'm not going to read them all out. I think you can look at them on the slide. They're fairly common sense, but important to mention. So although I do have to give some cautionary advice in my last 2 slides, really physical activity is beneficial for most people with chronic kidney disease, and so hopefully I've convinced you and you've seen that individuals living with kidney disease do benefit from being active. All stages benefit, all functional levels. Resources for getting active with CKD are developing in Canada, and there are many programs that even if they don't have a program developed, they know who to contact now in Canada to help them get active or help their patients get active. When starting an activity program or an exercise program, it's important to focus on your individual abilities, your individual resources, both at home and what you have available, but also what's available in your community, and then your individual goals, and ask for help if you need it. This is one of my favorite quotes because I think it really defines how exercise empowers people. This person was in one of our early exercise programs. Just because I'm a dialysis patient doesn't mean that I can't do anything else. And that's the end. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Bohm.
You're welcome.
And that's a beautiful segue into our final presenter of the evening, Sandra Muncaster. So, Sandra, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Okay. Okay, well, thanks for inviting me to the webinar. When I was first asked, I wasn't really sure how I was going to fill up all this time. I went from 7 minutes to 20 minutes, so I think I probably got the 20 minutes in there. So I'm not going to bore you with a lot of the details, but I'm gonna hit the highlights of basically what's been going on with me for the last 20-some years. So I was never really what you call a healthy child. I remember always having joint and muscle pain, upset stomachs, headaches, stuff like that. In the early 70s, this was all passed off as, growing pains. And it didn't help that I was extremely shy and suffered from anxiety when I was outside the comforts of my own home. So my parents, again, passed this off as just, being shy and introverted and, stuff like that. So could that have been the beginning of the kidney problems? It may have been, but, I guess we'll never really know for sure. That being said, I was around 9 when these symptoms turned into something new. I woke up one morning and literally was not able to walk. I remember I was in severe pain and my legs, they just wouldn't work. So off to the hospital we went, where I was diagnosed with rheumatic fever. I was then put on a low dose of penicillin, which I was told would be for the rest of my life, and that if I was ever going to be around children, as in daycares or teachers, whatever, that I could possibly relapse. Of course, now with the marvels of technology and my internet doctor, I believe I never had rheumatic fever, because other than that joint pain, I never had any of the other symptoms that are associated with that disease. Moving ahead, in my early teens, I was fairly active. I was into soccer, track and field, stuff like that. However, there was an underlying joint problems, but once again, this was being passed off now as me being too active and still in that growing mode of being a teenager. At 17, I met my husband, who was very much into weightlifting. Of course, at this age, you want to impress your significant other, so I joined him in the gym. This wasn't only a great way to spend time with him, but I became very in shape and built some good muscle mass. Well, for a girl, I wasn't the Incredible Hulk, but I was fit and strong, and I also jogged each day and felt a great sense of peace with each footfall on the pavement. Things moved forward in the normal teenage fashion until I was in my final year of high school. 1986 is when all these mysterious health problems finally came to a head. I was having severe headaches, migraine portion. Of course, I now know that was my accelerated blood pressure. That was literally felt like it was trying to blow the top of my head off, but I didn't have time to really worry about a headache. You know, I had a boyfriend. I was in shape. I figured life was pretty good. That was until that one day I went to school and I was suddenly unable to see straight. I called my mom and told her that I needed to go to the hospital. Here began the long and scary route to finding out what was causing my eyesight problems and all the rest of the health issues that I had been ignoring over the past few months. Now my slide's not working. Okay. Our leading oncologist at the time was called in, and he told me that I may have leukemia. Of course, that was a shock. Nobody wants to hear the C word. So they ran more tests and ruled out cancer, but finally pinned the diagnosis of end-stage renal failure on me. I was then told I would be put on dialysis immediately or I'd be dead within the week. Okay, wow, talk about scary. I went from a normal life to being a renal patient within a matter of a day. I remember thinking I was a sick joke that they were going to put a catheter in my chest and hook me up to a machine, not to mention those huge needles that would follow. I mean, who knew needles would even come that big? Actually, fondly referred to them, and still do, as knitting needles, but of course they're not that big. But then again, at that time I was just too sick, and I didn't really care what they had to do to make it all go away. I won't bore you with the rest of those details. I mean, it was a long and arduous process, but let's just say the muscle I had built up during that exercising time made it very difficult to insert the catheter into my chest. And after one punctured lung and the final insertion on the other side of my body, I started the dialysis journey on the next day. I was sick and scared, but the nurses in the Sault Ste. Marie renal unit were awesome. They made me feel safe and loved, and I'm not sure if I would have been able to survive all that trauma if it hadn't been for their caring touch. Most of these amazing women have since retired, and one has passed on, but I love them all like they're my own family. Interestingly enough, when I started back on dialysis in the 86, our unit had 5 stations and ran 3 shifts in the morning, afternoon, and evening. Most of these amazing, today we have 20 stations, so unfortunately that means that the kidney failure rate is also on the rise in Sault Ste. Marie. Our current team of nurses and support staff at Sault Ste. Marie Hospital are also awesome. And, of course, since I've been there so long, I've seen the nurses go through pregnancies, followed the progression of their children through pictures and stories, and now some of those babies are in college and embarking on their own lives. It's astounding how fast time flies. I've also had many tearful goodbyes to those nurses that are now retired and embarking on their own new journeys outside of the 4 walls of the hospital. I still keep in contact with some of these amazing women, and I always love running into others when I'm out and about. So back to my story. When I was on dialysis about a month, my body was clearing out the worst of the toxins that had been building up slowly over the years and literally killing me. And I was able to resume a normal life. I then made a vow to myself not to let the disease get the best of me, that I wouldn't live like a patient, but rather like a person with just a sidebar of dialysis in my life. So I was still active. I still loved jogging and was just living like an ordinary teen, although I did and still do hate that no chocolate rule, although our dietitian did not tell you that. Chocolate is high in phosphorus, so I do sneak a piece every now and again, but don't tell my dietitian that. So I was 18 on dialysis, and life was treating me pretty well. I had even landed my first job at a retail clothing store in the mall, but I only got to work 1 shift before the call for the transplant came in. Wow, just when I had settled into dialysis for the last 9 months, I was jolted by another unknown adventure on the horizon. So off my mother and I flew to Toronto to the transplant. Talk about scared. I think the needles of dialysis were less frightening than the major surgery I was about to have. When I arrived at the hospital in Toronto, I was prepped both physically and mentally for this huge undertaking. But really, how well can you be prepped for the insertion of an organ? It's not like walking into a room and having people shout, "Happy birthday." I was literally ushered into the hospital with a flurry of people all coming at me from different directions, poking me with different needles, and asking me a ton of questions, giving me a whole lot of information that I was too shocked and too stressed to remember, much less anything else. Thank goodness for those people today on the transplant list that the prep is a whole lot more thorough and given well in advance of ever getting the actual organ. The next thing I remember, I was waking up in the surgery, groggy, confused, with the operation full of people around me, and I was told the transplant went well. However, what my crash course of transplantation didn't tell me was the severe pain that I would be experiencing for the next few days. The fit body of mine didn't like being cut into, so it was rebelling with brutal pain as it tried to mend itself. Thank goodness for Demerol. But that too did pass while I waited and waited for the kidney to open. During all this wait time, I was put on a buffet of anti-rejection drugs, which, let's just say, is another story and not so kind on an 18-year-old body. I was in the hospital for about a month before they finally sent me home with my lunch bag full of anti-rejection and only half the kidney working. So here I am again trying to pick up the pieces of yet another one of life's twists. Now what? I lost my job at the clothing store, so I applied for a job at a new toy store and got it. If anyone has ever worked retail, you know you're on your feet a lot. But I was still young and still active, so despite the drug side effects that plagued me, I was still able to do those long shifts. However, even with the transplant and as time went on, I never felt very well. Most days I was exhausted from work and the side effects of the anti-rejection drugs, and yes, I had them all, and was told I even put a few more on the books. Of course, little did I know at that time that my little kidney was slowly failing and could no longer chug along on only its lower pole. So eventually it stopped working, and I found myself back on dialysis. Surprisingly, though, I felt a lot better on the machine than I ever did with the kidney. The anti-rejection drugs were slowly being stopped, my energy levels were on the rise, and I was back to the Monday, Wednesday, Friday dialysis routine. I reminded myself again that I couldn't let this disease rule my life, so I went after another job. This time in the pet industry, where I could be around my first love of all things furry, feathery, and even scaly. If I thought retail in the toy store was difficult, the pet store was even more so. Besides the customers, there was always cleaning up after those little critters to do. After 8 years at the pet store and 9 cats later, much to my husband's chagrin, I was just too tired to keep up with the pace of both a full-time job and dialysis. Plus, the pet industry was proving to be too difficult on my empathy for all those poor fur babies that I could no longer keep bringing home. Even though working at a full-time job was difficult, I think leaving the workforce was one of the worst things I ever did. Despite the decision being pretty much inevitable due to my health, having a job forced me to get out of the house and stay moving. So by this time, I was around 27, 28. The collateral damage from being on dialysis was beginning to take its toll on my body. I had a couple of revisions on my access to my dialysis arm, and I had been having menstrual issues that left me anemic most of the time. To help me build my red blood cells back up, I had to have a number of blood transfusions. And with each one of these, the antibodies increased, making it more difficult to not only endure these transfusions themselves, but also made it harder for me to find a kidney. Not to mention just life's everyday stresses catch up with you. In addition, I was having a difficult time keeping depression from seeping in. So between the disease, the realization, and the decision not to pursue another transplant, plus the depression, my life got pretty rough for a while. It did take its toll on both my husband and I for many, many years, and it still does. But with a lot of faith and some tough love on each other, we managed and are still managing to work through it. I find it very sad when a person needs to start dialysis and their significant other leaves them. Unfortunately, I've seen this happen with some of our patients. I can't imagine where I'd be without the support, dedication, and even that tough love of my husband. He's kept me focused and refused to let me give in, even when there were some days I didn't think I could go on. And most of all, he stuck with me through the financial burdens, the not being able to have children, lack of vacations and traveling, and just all the other life's normal activities that many people may take for granted. Having a chronic illness is just not on the patient, it's on the family as a whole. And having a support system in place is crucial to managing this disease. But on the upside, I also have my husband to thank for my writing career. He's actually the writer, and one day I was getting frustrated with him for not working on his novel. And he said, if you think it's so easy, you go right ahead and try. So the challenge was laid down, and being the bullheaded person that I am, I picked it up and tried my hand at a children's book because, as everyone knows, those are the easiest ones. There are a few words, and you're done. Needless to say, that didn't work out, but it did give me a new direction in life. I took to writing like a duck to water, and after many years of learning, trial and error, and stocked full of rejection letters, I found my niche market and have flourished ever since. I may not have written the next Everybody Poops, but I have done some work in the children's nonfiction arena and have been now firmly planted in the pet niche, working for a number of online websites. I may not have been able to continue working directly with those adorable fur babies or bring them all home, but at least now I can help educate pet parents all over the world. As much as I love writing and I'm building a career out of it, the trouble with being at the keyboard all day is that you get really lazy. I've noticed over time that my body was beginning to develop what the world fondly and most sarcastically refers to as the muffin top. Though I prefer to call it success, but really that just gives me another excuse to eat a donut at the typewriter. So here I am at my 40s, staying at home career, and managing a disease with a progression over time that does not get any better. In fact, it has a greater toll on all of the body. My joints are stiff and sore. I have numbness in both hands, lower back issues, neck problems from spending the 27-plus years sitting in the dialysis chair with on one arm unable to move, while the rest of my body overcompensates for it. And, of course, sitting at the computer desk and not moving a whole lot at home only adds to my health issues. So one day, about a year ago, our renal social worker came in and asked me if I'd like to participate in the active living program. I asked her what it was all about, and she told me that it would involve going up to our college once a week and to participate in the program to help renal patients get active again. I have to be honest with you, at this point in my life, I was pretty much couch and computer potato, and the thoughts of going out every Tuesday morning in March with the crummy weather that we usually have in Sault Ste. Marie didn't really sound like a whole lot of anything that I wanted to do. But deep down, I knew I was getting more tired and lazy, and I needed to get moving again before my body got so out of shape that I wound up in a wheelchair or struggling just to walk each day. So I reluctantly agreed to participate in this pilot program. My group in the active living have 4 other patients, both in the renal and PD programs. It also included 2 college health students, their director, and our social worker apprentice. It was a small enough group that I felt I was getting plenty of one-on-one direction, but not too small that it didn't cover up all those gruntings and groans coming out of my mouth every time I was given a new exercise to do. Don't get me wrong, it's not like we were Roombaing all over the college gym. These were based on simple exercises and basic stretching and balance. But for an out-of-shape marshmallow like myself, it was challenging. I actually knew I was in sad shape when the older woman beside me was outstretching me. But that was a good thing. We bonded as a team in the active living program, and we always encouraged each other to go a stretch further, another lap around the track. And plus, when somebody stretched further than the week before or met a personal goal, we cheered and celebrated like we had all just won the Olympic event. But it wasn't just a physical exercise. We came together as 4 women of like mind. We were able to share our stories and be understood on a different level, not by professionals that study the disease, but as people that are living it and dealing with all it entails on a daily basis. I think many healthcare professionals may look at the stats and say, yes, exercise is good for people with chronic illnesses. And I definitely do agree with that. But what I think they may fail to see is that when a person becomes ill, especially with a chronic condition, it also takes a mental toll. There are days I have to force myself to walk into the dialysis unit once again to face the needles, the noise, and all the extra stuff that goes along with chronic kidney disease. Let's face it, if your mind says, forget it, I'm too tired, I'm too sore today, the body's going to follow suit. Beating the mental part of this disease is half the battle. However, by the time the program was over, I had noticed a difference in both my mind and my body and my physical abilities. I was able to move without as much stiffness and pain. I felt better both physically and mentally. I had more energy to face the new challenges that presented themselves. Plus, I was able to quit all those blood pressure meds. And believe me, I do not miss those spikes of highs and lows that you tend to get when you're taking those blood pressure pills. In addition, I also found myself looking for other ways to be more active. I started doing simple yoga, walking, and even tried my hand, or I guess I should say my legs, at the elliptical, and it was fun. Unfortunately, it was my sister-in-law's, and she wasn't going to part with it, even though I know they're hanging their clothes on it. But I did find myself a new used one, and it has been wonderful. I try to get on it now at least every second day, if not every day, and I'm up to 15 minutes. That may not sound like a lot, but believe me, between the active living program and now, I did suffer from a case of the major lazies. So getting back into workout mode for the last couple of months has been great. I now feel stronger. I have more energy. I can even walk up the stairs in the hospital, whereas before I was taking the elevator. I also sleep better, and I have an overall better mental attitude. Though I do slip in that aspect as menopause is now starting, so there's another challenging journey on the horizon for me to overcome and my poor husband to once again endure. But that's for another webinar. Up to this point, though, I haven't really spoken on the diet aspects, but keeping your own personal renal diet is paramount in living a healthy life. The huge weight gains, the skyrocketing potassiums are not the way to survive in this disease. In addition, the fluid you are allowed to have should incorporate a daily cup or two of green tea. I believe this all-natural beverage has boosted my immune system to where I rarely catch a cold. And even though I'm in that germ factory 3 times a week, I'm still quite healthy. So in closing, if you're listening to this webinar and you're on dialysis or any other aspects of this disease, I guess what I'd like you to take from my little talk is to not live the disease. I've seen too many people, young, old, and in between, put themselves into wheelchairs in early graves because they failed to challenge themselves, both mentally and physically. I know it's difficult, and there's some days I could easily hop on the pity train and take a long ride. But indulging in that thought process, believe me, will only take you into deep, dark places that are difficult to climb out of. So if you're having a difficult time getting motivated to exercise, just start out by doing really anything. It doesn't matter if it's as simple as just walking around your home or apartment for a few minutes. The more you move, the more your body will gain its strength, and the more your mind will be set to do so. If you have friends or family that are willing, ask them to go for a walk with you. If you have a dog, get Fido out there for some fresh air. And if you don't have a dog, there's plenty of animals at that animal shelter just waiting for adoption. And lastly, be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up if you miss a day of activity or you just simply don't have it in you. There's always tomorrow. And I'm now going to borrow a phrase from Rocky Balboa, and it's actually one of my favorites that I live by. He said, "It isn't how hard you hit, but it's how hard you get hit and keep moving forward." Renal failure may be hitting us some days from every direction, but fighting back with action and a positive attitude is far better than living the disease. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sandra. What a wonderful way to end this discussion today. And thank you to all of the presenters, certainly. It's such a wealth of information to share. So we have a remaining half hour, and one of the benefits of this webinar is to have an exchange of ideas and answering questions and discussions. So we certainly want to hear from you, the participants, as well. We have a couple of options in which to ask those questions in terms of how to. The first is that you can type your question into the chat pod. Just as a reminder, only the presenters and I can see the question that you've posted. It is anonymous, and I will not be divulging any names. just only what you've written in the chat pod. Or alternatively, we do have a smaller group, so if you would like to ask the question over the phone, please feel free to. I would only ask those that are looking to ask over the phone that they unmute their lines, and we'll keep everyone else muted just so that we have a nice clear recording as we continue on tonight. And to do so over the phone, you would press, to unmute your individual line, you press *7. So as we have 3 presenters and a representative from the Kidney Foundation of Canada, if you can also preface any questions you might have with the person that you would like to direct it to. If you can't remember their name, that's okay. We can figure it out, I'm sure, but it would help me out as we're going along too if there's lots. And then finally, as we're going through the Q&A, I'm going to be posting some poll questions, and this is the first one. We'll do it here. So I invite you to answer all of those questions as we go through the Q&A and the discussion. There's only 4 of them, so please feel free to respond, and we'll be doing that. And your questions are your answers are anonymous, but they will help the Kidney Foundation of Canada certainly tailor any future webinars to meet your needs. Okay, so we'll move right into some questions here. And I believe this one is going to be for June. Do you have any recommendations for dietitians with experience in kidney disease?
Sorry, Jillian, was that for dietitians?
Yes. So she's asking, do you have any recommendations for dietitians with experience in kidney disease specifically?
So I guess I'm sorry, I'm not certain. Are you asking me to recommend a dietitian who has experience in kidney disease?
That's a good question. Maybe the person can clarify what they're seeking, if they're looking for suggestions on how to speak with dietitians who have experience, or if they're looking for specific names. They don't really indicate here. So a recommendation or a referral.
Okay, so so of course that will depend on where you live, but if you have kidney disease, then what I would recommend is that you contact your renal clinic and ask for a referral to their renal dietitian there.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so this will be for Dr. Bohm. What about post-transplant exercise limitations? Will I be able to resume cardio and endurance training? Great question.
Hi, it's Clara.
Hi.
You can just call me Clara. You don't need to call me Dr. Bohm.
Sure.
So post-transplant exercise limitations, it really depends on is this immediate post-transplant or long-term post-transplant? So immediate post-transplant, it's like with any other major surgery. You really need to refrain from any intense or moderate exercise for at least 4 to 6 weeks, often 8 weeks. It depends on how you feel. With a transplant, because of where it is, most transplant programs suggest no contact sports. And then finally, though, over time, you will be able to resume cardio and endurance training. But again, you may find that you really do have a bit of a setback in terms of once you're ready to exercise after the surgery, that your level of endurance has dropped quite a bit, and you have to kind of get back to it slowly over time.
Thank you. Okay, so moving forward. Physical activity was a big part of today's webinar, but this individual would like to see encouragement and support is given to chronic kidney disease patients through their unit. What can we do to incorporate fitness into dialysis units?
I assume this is for me again?
Yeah, I guess this would be for Clara again.
But if anybody else wants to answer too or has thoughts, I'd be happy to hear what they think. So I think that The reason that our physical activity programs here in the Manitoba Renal Program have been so successful is because there are both staff and individual with kidney disease champions that move these programs and these initiatives forward and really get patients interested. We also, though, and I think this is very key for our dialysis, cycling during dialysis program, we actually have a kinesiologist that runs the program and keeps people honest and biking and sees them at every dialysis session and things. And it doesn't have to be a kinesiologist. It can be a physiotherapist or a physiotherapy aide, but essentially what you need is somebody who's going to be a champion to champion the program and keep it running and things. Usually one or two people is enough to get the ball rolling and get interest. And so that would be my suggestion, is if you're interested in starting something, talk to the staff there and see what you can start, and you'll be surprised by how quickly it snowballs.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we have another question, so people keep on posting them, so this is lovely. I have been diagnosed with CKD, and I hope everyone knows what I'm referring to when I say CKD, so chronic kidney disease recently, and I don't have any risk factors. So I am wondering how I would get this. So I would post that, I guess, to any of you. Maybe Claire, you can maybe take a stab at it. I'll put you on the spot.
Okay. I think it's very hard to answer this question on an individual level, and there are lots of different reasons for kidney disease, and there are some kidney diseases that occur that don't really have the traditional risk factors associated with them. So I would suggest that you actually speak with your clinic staff and ask that question, because it's really hard for any of us to answer that over the internet, not knowing you.
Fair enough. Okay, so we have another question. This one is for Sandra, and this person says, amazing presentation, Sandra. Did you ever consider peritoneal dialysis? I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I chose it even over transplant, and I'm able to live an almost full life. So maybe, Sandra, you can speak to that possibly?
Yeah, they had presented me with that option, but for me, when I was young, I was still very active. Of course, I was working. The thoughts of having to do those exchanges every 4 hours to me was more work than just going to the unit. Plus, I have always lived with pets, so to keep that catheter part there clean, to me, I think I'd be at a higher risk of infection, and there's no way I could give up my pets. So, that in my own mind wouldn't be an option.
Thank you. Okay, so we have another question, and this one I'll direct to June. June, can you give any examples of some plant-based proteins?
Sure, of course. Yeah, so your best plant-based proteins are going to be things like beans and legumes, kidney beans, chickpeas, black beans. Those are all fabulous sources of plant-based protein. Tofu is another great one. Quinoa. A lot of people are quite into quinoa these days. So some of these most of these are high in potassium. So for anybody who requires a potassium restriction, they're not going to be ideal and should be worked into your diet with a dietitian, making sure you're not exceeding your potassium limit. But if you don't require a potassium restriction, then all those ones I just mentioned are great sources of protein.
Perfect, thank you. And I'll keep June. I'll keep you on the line here and ask another question to you. This person is asking, what can I do to keep healthy, strong bones while taking prednisone? And Sandra had mentioned being on prednisone as well, so obviously something that a lot of people have to face through their journey.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's a tough question. And actually exercise is one of the important things that you can do to keep your bones strong and healthy. It really depends exactly what stage of kidney disease you're at, or if you're on dialysis while you're taking the prednisone. But definitely, if you don't require potassium restriction, that DASH diet, that the slide I had on the DASH diet, and you can Google it. There's some great websites, but specifically I would recommend looking at the one on Dietitians of Canada, dietitians.ca, for a great DASH diet, which is a high calcium, modest animal protein, because the more animal protein you eat, the more calcium you pass out in your urine if you have functioning kidneys. So that kind of balanced diet will help preserve your kidney health. But I can't really recommend, your bone health. I can't really recommend calcium or vitamin D or anything like that without knowing somebody's specific medical condition. So I would definitely advise not taking any supplements without talking it over with your kidney team.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit, and this was something that someone had asked when they were registering, and I thought it was a great question, and Sarah and Lydia from the Kidney Foundation of Canada might be able to comment on this as well, and of course Sandra definitely as well. This person says, I want to be a supporter and helpful to a post-hemodialysis patient. How can I best do that?
I could take that one. Just be there for them. Encourage them. I find sometimes that people will utter those four little words that I can't stand, and it's just do this, or just why don't you just. Sometimes people just want to vent and need someone to listen and have a soft place to land, and encourage them, of course. You know, there's a fine line, I guess, too, between listening and then letting them just, get into a pity pot. So I think just, finding that balance of being a good supporter and getting them out there and, just listening and, just be a friend.
Thank you. And Lydia, anything to add to Sandra's comments?
I'd like to echo Sandra's comments, and just being there and listening to people would be a really great start. So I'd encourage people to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you. So again, switching gears a bit, another question that had come up earlier was, and this will be for Clara, how can I fit in exercise on a dialysis day?
Well, there are a couple ways. It depends. I guess I'm presuming this is probably hemodialysis because they're saying dialysis day, so not peritoneal dialysis. But I think from what people on dialysis tell me, I've never experienced dialysis, so I don't know, but you don't feel so good after dialysis, and you're unlikely to want to exercise, even if you've had a good, stable treatment. And so the suggestion would be either before dialysis, if you're not too fluid overloaded, you could do something, or during dialysis. So during hemodialysis, if there is an opportunity to be active, and it doesn't have to be, if your program doesn't have bikes that would fit with the chairs or anything, you can do weights, you can do stepper, you can do various things. But the other thing to remember too, I think actually Sandra said it, is that you don't really have to exercise every day. It's really, 3 or 4 times a week, and that allows you not to exercise on hemodialysis days if it really doesn't fit into your schedule, because you don't want to tire yourself out too much either. Now, having said that, if it gives you energy and you want to, then talk to your dialysis unit about what you can do during dialysis.
Thank you very much. So, and just seeing that some other people have mentioned here, the exercise options of free weights or resistance may not be the best option, as I have a fistula in my left arm. Are there any other suggestions? So this would be, I guess, to Clara, perhaps.
A fistula in your arm is not a contraindication for free weights. You will have a limitation of about 30 or 40 pounds, no more than that, to lift. But once the fistula has healed, there's no limitation to doing the weights. Now, one of the things that might happen is your fistula will develop, the vein will get larger, which is great for those of us who put the needles in, but that may be cosmetically not desirable, in which case you just don't want to lift really heavy weights. The other things that you could potentially do if you're trying to gain strength is the TheraBand, which are these stretchy bands that aren't as much weight, aren't as heavy as weights, so you could do that as well. I think that's probably, unless there's a follow-up question, I'll stop there.
No, that was it for that person,
Okay.
But I will keep you on the line here, Clara. This individual is asking, he says, based on the chart of the self-reported exercise levels, I am often exercising hard. For instance, ball hockey, ice hockey, boot camp classes, etc., that are a little more intense. If I'm feeling okay throughout, not out of breath, do I need to lessen the intensity, or do you think it's okay? He says, very rarely do I feel dizzy, and if I do, at that point I stop.
So it sounds like the level of activity that this particular individual is doing is appropriate for them, and I hope that's what people took from my talk, is that there are a huge, very wide variety of functional levels in people with chronic kidney disease, so one prescription doesn't fit all, and it is really very individualized. And it sounds like with all these activities that you've been doing activity for a long time and are established, and that's different than somebody who's just starting out and has never been active before. So as long as you said, you're not short of breath, you feel good, it's fine to continue those activities.
Thank you. So great questions coming forward. So thank you as we're going ahead with this evening, and thank you so much to everyone's comments already. So I'm not quite sure who I would direct this to, so I'll leave this open. This gentleman asks, please mention overnight PD and the pros and cons versus other forms of dialysis. So, anyone would like to take that one?
Hi, it's Lydia.
Hi, Lydia.
Hi. Look, thank you very much for that question. And yes, there are some pros and cons of all dialysis and modality choices. And we have quite a significant amount of information about the different dialysis modalities and information available for people who are interested. And I'm really glad that you asked that question, because that might be a really good topic for another presentation or another webinar. So I appreciate that, but I do encourage you to go along to our website and get some more information, or feel free to call one of our branches and talk to somebody who is quite familiar with the modality choices and can talk about the pros and cons of that.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to direct the next question to June. And I think this would be something that a number of people would probably want some advice on, and that is, do you have any tips for eating out?
Oh, that's a great question, and absolutely. Eating out is fun. We all like to go out once in a while, and you should definitely be able to continue to do that on occasion. So what it's important to remember is that anytime you're eating out, the food is going to be much more salty than what you would make at home. If you talk to a chef, they're going to tell you that they finish their dishes with salt. It's just standard restaurant behavior. It's just what they do. So a couple things you can do in advance. Talk to your dietitian if you have one. See if she has any suggestions, because often, we've called local restaurants, so we know places that are a little more kidney friendly, which restaurants don't use additives. So that's the first thing you can do. If you're going to a sit-down restaurant and you want to make reservations, let them know that you have a special diet and give them a little bit of a heads up about that. I don't eat salt, or I can't have any meats that have been treated with anything. If you're going to more of a fast food restaurant, almost all of those restaurants now have their nutrition information online. Even places like Red Lobster and Boston Pizza, you can go online and find their menus, and you can look in advance and find yourself some reasonable options. So if you go to, for example, Boston Pizza, you can get a steak and steamed vegetables and I think rice, and you can get yourself a meal under 500 milligrams of sodium. But you can also very easily get yourself a meal that has well over 4,000 milligrams. So just looking in advance, you can surprise yourself at what you find at these restaurants. And then the other thing I would just caution you with is watch the sauces. So any sort of sauce, any sort of condiment is going to add a tremendous amount of salt to your food. And the one that always comes to mind for me is that sauce that they have at Swiss Chalet. There's over 700 milligrams of sodium in one of those little sauces. And every once in a while I'll have somebody who tells me they order 4 of them because they love it so much. So keep that in mind as well. When you're eating out, you do want to try to avoid as much of those salty sauces as you can.
Thank you. I think that's great advice for us all.
Yeah.
In addition to those that have some kidney challenges. Sandra, I'm going to direct the next question to you. I certainly was inspired by your humor and your positive perspective. And the question is, how do you stay so optimistic and motivated given some of the challenges that you face?
Oh, wow. Of course, some days are harder than others. I, as I mentioned before, I do have faith. And I do have a great husband. I have a great support system at home. So, that goes a long way. I also have, with my journey, it's been different because I've been around these nurses for so long that they are my friends more than they are nurses. So I can bounce a lot of stuff off of them. I get a lot of good advice from them. And I just don't live the disease. I walk out of that hospital and I'm like, okay, I don't think about dialysis until I walk back into the hospital. And realistically, yes, like I said before, some days are harder than others. But, you just got to find something you love to do and try to forget about the bad stuff until you got to go back and do it again.
I think that's, again, wisdom that we can put forward to a variety of different circumstances. So that's just very inspiring. So thank you for those comments. It's always a difficult segue to jump back into something else, but I'm going to try to make that leap and ask Clara if she has any exercise videos online that may be suitable for people that are on dialysis.
We don't have exercise. Well, we don't. I can give you 3 sites that I thought might be good for people who are interested in exercising. Do you want me to write them in the chat?
Yeah, if you have them, that would be great.
Okay.
I mean, I would view it as well, but yeah, if you already have it, that's wonderful.
Yeah. I will just summarize them. There's a lifeoptions.org. It's very old. It's from actually the early 2000s, late 90s, and it was done by Trish Painter, who is one of the pioneers of exercise with kidney disease. And that's really focused on dialysis patients and exercise, but it has a whole manual, and most of it is still quite relevant as to how to get started and things. And then the Active Living Program, the Kidney Foundation website, that has some stretching and strength exercises and some instructions and things. So that would be the other place. And then our Manitoba Renal Program website is called kidneyhealth.ca, and there are some pamphlets and some links, and a link actually to a video of patient cycling, not an instruction video, but just kind of educational about what cycling is about and things like that. So, but I'll type it in. Yeah.
Yes, if you would, that would be wonderful. And then people can actually, while we're on the webinar, you can click on the links that Sarah is typing into the chat pod, and then it'll take you to, it'll just open up another tab or if not, then you can sort of just maybe take note of it while we're finishing off. I think we can probably squeeze one more question in, and that question will be for June. June, the question is, this person asks, I'm a vegetarian. Will this be a problem if I have to go on dialysis?
Okay, so the answer to that question is it depends very much on what sort of dialysis you choose, whether or not you require potassium restriction. So if you do require potassium restriction, then you will need to sit down and really work with your dietitian and make sure that you're choosing the lowest potassium proteins out there, and that your overall diet doesn't exceed the amount that you can safely tolerate. If you're going on to a home-based therapy, home hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis, you may be able to continue on that vegetarian diet without any problems. And certainly if you follow a pescatarian diet and you eat fish, you'll have no problem at all meeting your protein requirements.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so it is, by my clock, 2 minutes time, so I don't want to put anyone on the spot where they're feeling like they have to rush through it. So I think this is a good place to end. I, of course, want to thank everyone for their participation this evening. It always makes for a wonderful event when we have lots of interaction and questions and discussion and feedback, so that's great. And, of course, on behalf of Brain Exchange, I'd certainly like to thank our presenters, June Martin, Dr. Clara Bohm, and Sandra Moncaster. And at this time, I'd like to invite Lydia Lauder from the Kidney Foundation of Canada just to share any final words that you may have.
Thank you very much, Gillian. On behalf of the Kidney Foundation of Canada, I would like to sincerely thank June, Clara, and Sandra for your wonderful presentations. They were very informative and very much appreciated. We're very grateful for your participation and all the insights that you shared with us tonight. Thank you also to Gillian for moderating, and a big thank you to Sarah Cruikshank, Louise Dolpay, and Wendy Kadiba, amongst others at the Foundation, for their hard work behind the scenes. And finally, thank you to everyone who has listened in tonight. We hope you enjoyed the session, and everybody have a great evening.
So we'll close now. Everyone, thank you so much for your time this evening, and I wish you all the best. Take care, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Night.